When a powerful, confident black businesswoman is sneered at and dismissed by an arrogant airport agent in front of a line of strangers, no one expects what happens next. They think that a condescending smile and a decision to switch her seat can strip away her dignity. But they don't know she isn't an ordinary passenger. She is the silent storm they never see coming. And before that day ends, careers will crumble, an entire power structure will quake, and justice will be served by the bravest kind of silence. Stay until the very end to witness how one woman turns quiet humiliation into a retaliation that makes an entire industry bow its head in change. Gentle morning light filters through the glass panels of Los Angeles International Airport, illuminating the busy terminal with a fleeting calm that belies the chaos. Naomi Carter wears a simple pink dress and pulls along a polished suitcase. She stands as an icon of composed elegance amid the frantic rush of connecting travelers, echoing announcements, and the clatter of rolling luggage across the glossy tile floors. Her gaze is sharp yet serene, the poise of a woman who has walked airport corridors on every continent. Each step Naomi takes reminds the world that a certain kind of power exists quietly, unassuming, unforced, merely standing firm in life's currents. Some fellow passengers and even a few airport employees can't hide their curious or admiring looks. A few might think to themselves, "Who moves through this crowd with such luxury and confidence?" But Naomi doesn't pay them any mind. To her, those glances have become part of every journey, a flip side of success that recognizes her, but also marks the thin line before prejudice. When she reaches the check-in counter at gate 24, Naomi pauses, straightens her shoulders and offers a gentle smile. Holding out her boarding pass, she says, "Good morning. Could you please confirm my boarding for seat 2A?" Her softly modulated American-British accent, neither the perfect native tone many here expect, immediately creates a brief hush around her. Each word is clear, polite, and brimming with confidence and education. In that instant, the atmosphere behind the desk seems to sag. A few people nearby exchange glances, their lips curling into barely noticeable smirks. But Naomi keeps standing tall, her hand lightly gripping the carry handle of her suitcase as if she's braced for anything, especially the invisible biases lurking in terminals, boardrooms, or any place that's supposed to honor reason and fairness. For Naomi Carter, every trip is more than just a business journey. It's a trial by fire for the resolve and pride of a woman accustomed to living between two worlds, one of glossy success and the other of suspicion and doubt that society reserves for those who aren't quite one of them. And this morning, at gate 24, something that looks perfectly ordinary begins with a strange sensation. Naomi senses a stillness she alone hears, the warning of misfortune quietly gathering behind the clerk's mask of courtesy. The stillness was shattered by a quiet sound sharper than any ringtone. Behind the counter stood Chloe Miller, a 30-something airline agent, her blonde hair swept up into a tight bun, her crisp uniform masking what lay beneath. She lifted her head and stared at Naomi with a chill, appraising look, her eyebrows arching as if inspecting every detail of Naomi's appearance. Chloe didn't rush to take Naomi's boarding pass. Instead, she offered a half smile, one of those knowing smirks reserved for those who understood its real meaning. "Oh, your voice. It's so unusual," she said, quietly but loudly enough for people in line nearby to look up. Chloe's expression snapped from feigned friendliness to something cutting and mocking. It wasn't a simple observation. It carried the unspoken message Naomi had heard too many times in her life. You don't belong here. Chloe deliberately took Naomi's ticket in slow motion. Her red-painted nails tapped lightly on the keyboard, each keystroke signaling to her coworkers. Another employee behind the desk glanced at Naomi, then turned away, lips pressed together to hide a smile. Clearly, these little comments had become routine, a silent pastime on long mornings. Chloe studied the name on the ticket, then looked back up. "Traveling for work, are you? You look busy?" Her emphasis on "you" and the deliberate pause hinted at underlying contempt, no attempt to conceal it. From behind, a few people in line began whispering. Some snickered. Others looked at Naomi with a mix of curiosity and indifference. Beneath her professional facade, Chloe embodied the invisible barriers Naomi had encountered hundreds of times: polite exclusion, an unspoken rulebook for anyone deemed different. To Chloe, any difference, voice, skin color, demeanor, was justification for unwritten rules, wounds that bled without drawing attention but still wounded a person's dignity. Naomi remained calm. Her eyes met Chloe's without flinching, refusing to play along with the petty mind game. Yet, in that instant, she sensed the subtle movements in the air around her. Every gesture, every sideways glance from the crowd, the quiet complicity of the other agents, all coalescing into a collective cut, silent yet bleeding. Chloe typed a few more keys, then suddenly paused, pretending to spot something unusual on her screen. Her half-smile sharpened, her eyes gleaming with a private triumph. Naomi felt it plainly. Each small movement by Chloe was not random, but orchestrated. A ritual of exclusion performed in broad daylight, felt most keenly by those who, like Naomi, knew the sting of being cut under a smile. In the warmth of the morning light, the true wound came not from a harsh word, but from that tiny smile, that soft phrase, that indifferent attitude. And in that moment, Naomi knew this journey wouldn't be just another trip. It would be a new trial by fire, not only for herself, but for an entire system all too accustomed to these cuts beneath the smile. The subtle chill in Chloe's smile hadn't even faded before she moved on to the next step of her ritual of exclusion. Decisive, professional, leaving Naomi no moment to regain control. Chloe's red-painted fingertips flew across the keyboard, tapping insistently yet blatantly, signaling intent. She glanced at her monitor, then looked back up, her voice now stripped of any pretense of politeness, cold and clinical. "Ah, Miss Carter, the system's just notified me. You've been reassigned to seat 44 E Economy. The system's been acting strange lately, I guess." The announcement cut through the air like a verdict. As soon as she spoke, Chloe tilted her head, her lips curling into a dismissive smirk. Treating the demotion of a designer-suited businesswoman to the back of the plane as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. Naomi said nothing at first. She quietly offered her paper ticket and showed her reservation code on her phone, speaking with calm authority. "I reserved and confirmed seat 2A, first class." Her tone was measured, neither loud nor soft, but her eyes held a solemn determination that would not be cowed. Chloe glanced at the ticket without care, shrugged, and deliberately avoided Naomi's gaze. Probably just a system glitch. These things happen all the time. There might be a mix-up, but there's nothing else I can do right now. If you'd like to file a complaint, you can go to customer service. Her rehearsed excuses dripped with indifference. Beneath the veneer of professionalism lay a cold intent to push Naomi aside. The atmosphere around the check-in desk shifted instantly. Passengers in line began murmuring, some annoyed at the delay, others rolling their eyes at Naomi. "Here we go again. Guess she's upset about economy, huh?" Light chuckles echoed. Anonymous frustration fell on Naomi's shoulders, simply because she dared to assert her rightful seat, payment, status, and dignity notwithstanding. Chloe glanced at her colleague behind the counter, giving a subtle wink that signaled, Everything's under control. Another agent averted their eyes, shirking any responsibility, leaving Naomi even more isolated in this unspoken group verdict. Chloe bent over her keyboard once more, pretending to comb through the system, though she made no real effort to resolve the situation. The entire performance was a demonstration. The power of a customer like Naomi, wealthy, accomplished, respected everywhere, now reduced to zero by an arbitrary decision and a bit of petty authority from a gatekeeper. That denial required no shouting and no insults. All it took was a simple command: cancel the first-class seat, push her into economy and a dismissive, icy attitude. This is how Chloe and the system taught outsiders their place. Not in the front, not in the priority line, not at the center of power. Naomi maintained her gaze, refusing to shrink under that contempt. Yet deep inside, she felt the cold seep into her bones, not because of the seat, but because her true authority was brazenly erased with a few keystrokes and a mocking smile behind a professional mask. In that moment, Naomi realized what she faced today was not merely a ticketing error, but a system designed to invalidate and humiliate anyone it chose. The air at the check-in counter grew thick and chillier than any blast of air conditioning. Naomi held Chloe Miller's gaze, expecting at least a flicker of embarrassment or some hint of discomfort at such an absurd situation. But there was none. Only a cold, indifferent calm, edged with a faint, complacent arrogance, as though Chloe relished the small but weighty power she wielded. It was the look of someone accustomed to handling unruly customers, not by shouting or insulting them, but by donning a professional mask of indifference, hiding malice behind icy words. Naomi could see that every movement Chloe made had been rehearsed. The contemptuous shrug, the mocking glance at a coworker, the quick smile before returning to her keyboard as though nothing of consequence had occurred. Naomi knew this wasn't a system error. It was a deliberate decision, a subtle cut that only someone who has lived under the shadow of discrimination could recognize. "I want to speak with the duty manager," Naomi said clearly and firmly, her voice steady, but deep down, her pride felt trampled. Chloe didn't refuse, yet she didn't hurry. With an irritated air, she tapped her radio button, shooting Naomi a look that clearly said, "Here comes another problem." "The manager will be here shortly. Please wait right here," Chloe said, forcing a stiff smile, though her eyes flicked toward the other passengers as if to signal, "Look, another troublesome customer." The atmosphere grew even heavier. A clerk at the next desk leaned over to whisper to a coworker. Both shrugged and chuckled softly. Those laughs weren't loud, but they cut like knives. A young passenger in line shook his head and muttered, "Look at her, acting like she's so important." A middle-aged woman in business attire glanced at Naomi with a mixture of pity and unease, then quickly averted her eyes, as though afraid of getting involved in nonsense. A man behind them mumbled, "It's just a seat. Why all this drama?" Naomi stood at the center of a ring of strangers' stares, each with a reason to stay silent, to avoid trouble, to protect their own fragile peace. Their complicity was silent, wordless, yet enough to leave anyone facing injustice completely isolated. In Naomi's mind, every moment she'd ever been silently excluded at airports, conferences, boardrooms, all those old experiences resurfaced like wounds that still bled. She realized that what she faced wasn't a minor ticketing mishap, but a craftily constructed system of discrimination, where those with a shred of authority were ready to use it to preserve an unfair status quo. And everyone around her was silently complicit. When Naomi glanced around seeking support, every pair of eyes slid away. In that moment, she understood that the cruelest part wasn't being denied a seat. It was having her value and presence denied simply because she was different. In broad daylight, in a so-called modern society, through methods that left no visible trace except a lingering ache. Amid the silent atmosphere and averted gazes, Naomi stood firm, quiet but resolute, like a bold period on the blank page of a morning at the airport. She fixed her eyes on the distance, striving not to let loneliness and hurt overwhelm her. Each breath felt heavier as all attention settled on her, not in concern, but in cold scrutiny and alienation. While Naomi was still weighing how to respond, a soft voice sounded beside her, low enough that only she could hear it. "Miss Carter." Naomi turned. Standing before her was a young man with tousled brown hair, dressed in a crisp, barely worn airline uniform. His name tag read Lucas Walker. Lucas's eyes were full of confusion and unease. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then leaned in close, lowering his voice as though afraid of being overheard. I'm just a new employee, but I heard the women talking. The company doesn't want customers like you in first class. They said, you don't match our brand image." Those words hit Naomi like a piercing blade. Quiet, unassuming, yet enough to freeze her entire body. Everything she'd sensed was now confirmed by the confession of someone on the inside. Behind the polite smile, behind the system error, behind the dismissive attitude, lay a decision that had been prearranged, a tacit rule that outsiders would never see, but that victims felt down to every cell. Naomi looked deeply into Lucas's eyes, seeing in them both guilt and fear. The young man seemed torn between honesty and the fear of being ostracized. Lucas swallowed hard and hurriedly added, "I'm sorry, I just thought you should know. They said anyone with a strange voice or who doesn't fit in gets downgraded. It's not a technical glitch at all, ma'am." Naomi gave a small nod and offered a grateful yet pained look. She didn't blame Lucas, he was the only one brave enough to speak the truth, but felt pity for him, for herself, and for a system that had nurtured injustice in prolonged silence. Not far away, Chloe continued chatting cheerfully with her co-workers, smiling confidently without a hint of misgiving. They all knew exactly what was happening, and they even felt safe, empowered by the strength of their unspoken rules. Every humiliation unfolded in total silence. No one shouted insults at Naomi, and no one physically removed her from the terminal. Just a decision, a system error, a silent consensus. Naomi felt that shame in every fiber, but it did not make her break down or collapse. Instead, it crept through her like a winter chill, seeping layer by layer through her clothes, freezing her spirit. Under the glare of the airport lights, Naomi realized she had stepped into a battle without gunfire, where every passing second carved a new scar across a person's dignity. And this time, she decided, she would not let it pass quietly as it had so many times before. Lucas's quiet sigh still lingered in Naomi's ears as he retreated to the counter, leaving her to face a reality colder than ever. The truth had been spoken, yet it dissolved amidst a sea of indifferent faces. Naomi stood there, isolated among the growing crowd of passengers, feeling the weight of their furtive glances, the heavy silence draping the air like a thick blanket nobody wanted to touch. She glanced around, searching for even a single sympathetic look. Instead, everyone turned away in unison. Passengers in line stared intently at their phones. Some deliberately gazed out the window, and others shifted uneasily, as if determined not to get caught up in any drama. Even those who recognized the injustice, like the elegant woman seated across from her, dared only to study Naomi with hesitant eyes, pursing her lips before swiftly looking away. The impulse to speak up seemed cut off by a vague fear of inconvenience, fear of involvement, fear of losing their own fragile safety. For a moment, Naomi caught the eye of Grace Turner, the young flight attendant waiting by the boarding gate. Grace hesitated, worry flashing across her face. Her eyes seemed to plead to speak out, to stand up for what was right. But in the next heartbeat she bowed her head and moved quickly toward the group of attendants, melting into the crowd as though she herself had committed a grave offense. No matter how keenly intuitive Naomi might be, she understood. In this environment, silence was a tradition passed down from one generation to the next. Behind her, Chloe and her co-workers continued to chat, their quiet laughter betraying a hidden triumph. They didn't need to raise their voices or provoke anyone. Each sideways glance, each veiled whisper was part of an invisible net cast over those who didn't fit in, and no one but Naomi dared confront it head-on. The sophisticated woman, her hair piled high, dressed in a Chanel suit with a crocodile leather handbag neatly placed beneath her, remained seated opposite Naomi. Her gaze rested on Naomi for a long moment, as if wanting to say something, but in the end she simply exhaled, silently turned the page of her newspaper, and chose peace of mind over speaking the truth. Naomi understood all too well. Here, justice wasn't something most people dared demand, especially when it meant challenging a system built on silence and complicity. Personal safety, convenience, fear of trouble. These had transformed decent people into silent spectators, content merely to witness without intervening. She felt it keenly. If the sting of exclusion ran deep, the loneliness of being turned away by the whole group was exponentially sharper. It was a confrontation without sound, where the true power belonged to the invisible consensus of the crowd, and the weak were anyone who dared break the silence. Naomi tightened her grip on her suitcase handle and took a deep breath. She wasn't waiting for anyone to rescue her from this situation, and she no longer hoped for any help. But inside, a silent vow took shape. If justice here was merely a silent charade, she would rewrite the script herself, relying on her own determination, even if it meant standing alone against the whole world. The silence, trailing behind Naomi, rippled through every seat and hurried footstep in the waiting area. But instead of collapsing under that sense of isolation, she slowly walked to a distant corner of Gate 24 and chose a quiet seat with a clear view of the check-in counter. She placed her suitcase at her feet, clasped her hands together on her lap, and fixed her eyes, colder than any light streaming through the terminal's windows, on Chloe Miller behind the desk. As soon as she sat down, her phone vibrated in her purse. Naomi pulled it out to find a single message from her personal assistant. "Ready." A simple note, but it signaled the start of a plan long in the making. A plan not meant for petty arguments, but for a weapon wielded by someone who knows how to wait patiently and strike at the precise moment. Naomi refused to let emotion cloud her observation. She quietly watched every subtle move Chloe made behind the counter. Though Chloe had just treated Naomi with icy indifference, her demeanor changed completely with other passengers. For the white man in a navy vest, Chloe offered a sweet smile, gave a slight nod, typed nimbly on her computer, and announced cheerfully, "Sir, you've been upgraded to 3B. Have a wonderful flight." When a young blonde woman with elaborate makeup inquired about a delayed flight, Chloe was diligent and attentive, doing everything she could to reassure the passenger, even proactively switching her to a window seat without a moment's hesitation. Not a trace of exasperation, nor a flicker of reluctance. Naomi memorized each gesture, bias not written in any internal policy, yet manifest in every transaction, every service interaction, every secretive glance exchanged among the check-in staff. It was a petty but dangerous form of power, the ability to decide who receives priority and who suffers loss, simply by pressing a key and delivering a selective smile. Around Naomi, the flow of people continued without pause. A few passers-by stole glances at her, eyes detached or wary, as if they didn't want to get involved with someone in trouble. Occasionally, Naomi caught a guilty look from Grace Turner, the young flight attendant. But Grace quickly turned away, retreating to the safety of silence. Naomi sat still, sorting through every detail in her mind. Chloe's blatant favoritism, the complicit glance from the colleague at the neighboring desk, the manager's continued absence, the cold indifference of the onlookers. She understood that this battle wouldn't be won through a sudden outburst of anger, but through a calculated strategy, a powerful response staged behind the scenes, where true strength makes no sound. In that moment, Naomi's eyes flicked to the flight information display, and her lips curved into a cold smile. If Chloe believed she could crush someone's self-worth with a petty decision and a complicit system, she had made the gravest mistake. Underestimating the strength of patience and intellect, underestimating a woman accustomed to surviving within the storms of hidden power. Just as everything seemed to calm, a real storm quietly began brewing. Not at the check-in counter, but within the hearts of those brave enough not to yield to injustice. The air around the check-in counter grew heavier, thick with unspoken tensions. From her seat, Naomi watched patiently, her eyes quietly tracing every tangled thread in the web of complicity the people behind the desk wove day after day. Lucas Walker, the young attendant who had bravely revealed the truth to Naomi, now stood silently beside the ticket printer. His anxious gaze darted around, palms slick with sweat. He tried to stammer an explanation to the on-duty manager, voice barely above a whisper. "I was only following Chloe's instructions. I didn't make any decisions." But Lucas knew all too well that it was his own silence, his willingness to bow under pressure, that made him a link in this chain of injustice. Every time he recalled Naomi's calm but icy expression, he felt suffocated. Outside, Grace Turner couldn't escape her own guilt. She slipped into a corner of the waiting area, hands trembling as she adjusted her name badge, heart full of regret. Many times, Grace had wanted to return to Naomi's side, to offer a comforting word, or at least a sympathetic glance. But each time she took a step forward, the laughter of her colleagues sounded like a warning. In the end, Grace could only lower her head and melt back into the false safety of the crowd. Chloe Miller, at the center of this storm, still seemed confident in her professional front. She continued chatting with other customers, moving about as if nothing had happened. In Chloe's eyes, everything was under control because she believed no one would dare, or could, challenge the unspoken rules here. What Chloe didn't realize was that every raised eyebrow, every mocking smile, every casual act of favoritism had been closely observed by Naomi, recorded not just in her memory, but by someone who had faced countless forms of injustice. In that charged atmosphere, each employee played a distinct role. Lucas, paralyzed by the fear of being ostracized if he didn't comply. Grace, tormented by what she knew she should do but lacked the courage to do. Chloe, smug in the belief that her petty authority was untouchable. All of them, one way or another, had become links in a chain of complicity. No shouting required, no arguments necessary. Just by refusing to act or speak up, they transformed a small injustice into a powerful, unseen system of oppression. Naomi quietly tracked every turn of a back, every scoffing laugh from those unwilling to face the truth. In those moments she understood. The real indignity didn't come from one person alone, but from a collective that chose safety over justice, silence over resistance, and all of them, willing or not, were co-authors of the small tragedy unfolding in the airport this morning. The air in the terminal grew increasingly stifling as boarding time approached. Chloe Miller, still radiating confidence and a triumphant expression, cast a quick glance at Naomi, as if to confirm that everything was settled. Chloe's co-workers began tidying up the check-in counter, the overhead speakers announcing boarding groups, all unfolding like the same play performed every day. But today, behind that professional facade, each thread of guilt, shame, and unease was slowly revealing itself. Naomi remained seated in a secluded corner, quiet, without protest, but her cold, unwavering gaze tracked every move of those who had conspired to push her outside that hidden circle of power. As the final group of passengers prepared to line up at the gate, Naomi rose slowly. Her steps were steady and resolute, as if nothing in the world could shake her again. She walked directly to the counter, standing before Chloe and the other agents, locking eyes with Chloe's seemingly invulnerable stare. In that moment, the terminal hushed for a few seconds, as if clearing space for an unexpected turn of events. Naomi did not raise her voice, nor make any hostile gesture. She simply spoke in an even, measured tone, quiet yet cutting like a curse. "I hope you're ready. This story doesn't end here." Those words weren't just for Chloe. They sent a message to the entire system of accomplices and everyone watching. People who thought that by removing someone different from their comfort zone, everything would return to normal. Chloe froze, a small crack appearing in her triumphant facade, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, her hand, once confidently poised over the keyboard, clenching suddenly. For a moment, she fully felt the chill of the truth being exposed, that her petty authority was nothing more than a temporary illusion in the face of those who dared to stand up and refused to be silently erased. The other agents, including Lucas and Grace, also stood motionless in silence. They understood that this moment would not pass easily, that today's outcast had spoken not to beg, but to warn of an approaching storm. Naomi turned away, each step taking her away from Gate 24 with a solemn pride. No one dared block her path, no one spoke. Each footfall was a declaration of an unspoken truth. This silence will protect no one anymore. Everyone who witnessed that scene felt something shatter, a forewarning of inevitable consequences. Though it came quietly, it would be powerful enough to sweep away all illusions of temporary power in this outdated system. And from the moment Naomi passed through those doors, the real storm began. The doors of Gate 24 closed behind Naomi, but the aftershock of her silent proclamation did not fade from the air. Just minutes after she left, things at the airport began to go awry. On the check-in counter's computer screens, the list of premium reservations kept reporting errors. Priority tickets vanished from the system, and flight cancellation notices appeared one after another. The atmosphere, usually defined by stability and order, was now unsettled by waves of confusion. The staff quickly noticed that VIP clients in the airline system were repeatedly calling to cancel bookings or asking to switch to other carriers. Internal emails flooded in from operations. Suspend all upgrade procedures. Re-examine the Coleman Travel Group contract. Report anomalies regarding passengers at Gate 24. These messages were the first cracks, shaking what had been assumed to be an unbreakable foundation of the operating system. Lucas Walker sat silently before his screen, eyes wide with panic as the chain of blinking red alerts scrolled by. He began to realize that what had seemed like a safe position, simply following orders, had actually turned him into the most fragile link in the chain. His hands trembled as data lines disappeared. System errors repeated endlessly, and nothing could be controlled. Chloe Miller could no longer maintain her usual composure. Her normally steady fingers shook over the keyboard. She kept mistyping codes, triggering error messages on screen, and irate customers turned to her in frustration. Her coworkers began to whisper, their scrutinizing eyes shifting toward Chloe, not with admiration for a controller of everything, but with doubt and distance. A mid-level manager hurried over and asked quietly, "What's going on, Chloe? Why are there so many cancellation requests? You didn't make any mistakes, did you?" Chloe stammered, sweat beading on her brow, trying to calm herself. I was just following procedure. It's probably a technical glitch." Yet in her heart, Chloe knew better than anyone. All of this was the result of a deliberate choice, an intentional decision to discriminate and exclude. She felt her hands turn icy and her chest tighten with a fear she had never known since donning that uniform of authority. Up in the executive offices, a torrent of urgent emails poured in, and department heads convened emergency meetings to trace the problem's origin. Down at the counters, tension hung in the air, and fear spread from person to person. They had thought that simply pushing someone like Naomi aside would solve everything, but they overlooked one fact. True power now lay in the hands of the very person they had excluded. What had seemed to be a hardy, unshakable system suddenly revealed how fragile it truly was, capable of collapsing over a petty decision, a bit of complicity laid bare. The domino effect had begun, and it would not stop at a single seat, a single flight, or a quiet morning. The collapse was spreading by the minute, unstoppable, leaving behind only shock, regret, and the doubtful gazes turned toward those who once believed they held life and death power in their hands. Small cracks in the system began as booking errors and cancellation emails, but within an hour, the domino effect had reached the highest levels of the airline's executive operations. In the main control room, phones rang nonstop. Red alert lights blinked every second, and urgent emails flooded the internal inbox. No one could deny it. Something very serious was unfolding. Dennis Brooks, the morning shift supervisor, was immediately summoned to an emergency meeting alongside the heads of technical services, customer care, and strategic partnerships. His face was tense, beads of sweat rolling down as he faced the leadership team. A department director slammed his fist on the table, voice harsh. Why have all Coleman Travel Group's contracts been frozen at once? Who authorized moving their priority passengers into economy? Why have our international partners abruptly suspended all connections? Dennis fumbled with the report in his hand, voice trembling. "Sir, we were simply following company procedures. There were some technical glitches, possibly related to recent changes at Gate 24. Another department head interrupted urgently. "In just 2 hours, we've lost nearly 40% of our international charter bookings. Partners in Europe and Asia have sent emails halting cooperation. This isn't just about one VIP passenger. We're at risk of being dropped from global alliances." In that tense atmosphere, the truth became clearer than ever. Naomi Carter was not merely a single passenger. She was the CEO of an international travel conglomerate worth nearly $1 billion, a diamond-tier client who controlled passenger flows and contracts, large and small, with dozens of airlines around the world. Every move she made could send shockwaves through a network of hundreds of partners. And now, the cold exclusion by Chloe and the Gate 24 team had triggered an unprecedented catastrophe. The high-level charter flight control system was effectively disabled, and countless prime flights were pulled from the schedule. Partners in the US, UK, Germany, and Japan sent warning letters, and international travel insurers began demanding contract renegotiations or suspending payouts. In the private chat groups of regional directors, the name Naomi Carter, accompanied by glaring red question marks, popped up repeatedly. Who handled her at Gate 24? Was this discrimination? Losing trust means losing everything. Who's responsible? Downstairs, Chloe Miller was called into the meeting room, facing the cold stares of senior managers, while Lucas and Grace stood outside, weighed down by fear and regret. Every whispered conversation, every hesitant glance had turned into genuine panic, because now everyone understood. A single, petty decision, a moment of complicity, could put thousands of employees at risk of losing their jobs and send a financial empire into freefall. The airline's internal structure was rattled. Departments scrambled to track down every loophole. But each attempt to fix things only exposed how fragile and precarious the once thought impregnable power network had become. And in the eye of that storm, only Naomi remained quietly composed, as she had chosen from the start, not to confront injustice with a shout, but with real power and a silent, far-reaching retribution. As the tense atmosphere engulfed the hallways and meeting rooms, every department scrambled to manage the crisis. Yet, behind the scenes, each individual, the small links in this tragic chain, had to confront their own truths. Grace Turner was the first to buckle under the weight of guilt. She stood silently near the manager's office door for what felt like forever, clutching a stack of files until her knuckles went white. Grace's eyes went red as she replayed the image of Naomi standing alone in the crowd, her desperate gaze searching for someone to speak up. And that moment when Grace had lowered her head and walked away. Finally, summoning all her courage, Grace knocked quietly and asked to meet the manager in person to report everything that had happened at Gate 24. She recounted the events without evasion or excuse, every detail, every contemptuous word from Chloe, every complicit glance from the other agents, and her own silence. Her voice shook as she admitted, "I saw the injustice, but I chose to stay silent. I'm sorry for not standing up for what was right." Meanwhile, Lucas Walker, the young agent who'd quietly whispered the truth to Naomi, couldn't sleep because of his remorse. He opened his laptop and drafted a detailed system report, sending it straight to the quality control department. There is evidence of priority list manipulation and discrimination based on race, voice, and appearance. I recommend a comprehensive investigation. Lucas presented exactly what he'd witnessed, supporting it with system logs and internal emails. He knew this could cost him his job, but he understood that the shame of staying silent would haunt him far more than unemployment. Chloe Miller, once arrogantly untouchable, now faced herself in the restroom mirror for the first time. Her bold lipstick, perfectly styled bun, and crisp airline uniform suddenly felt alien as she stared at her own horrified reflection. Memories of every sneer, every cold decision to push customers like Naomi out of the spotlight came back like an inescapable indictment. With trembling hands, Chloe opened her phone and typed Naomi Carter's personal email address. In the message, there were no more excuses, no defenses. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. I thought I was powerful because of the small authority I held here, but in truth, I was just a coward who chose silence and complicity. I stayed quiet out of fear, and I contributed to your suffering. I hope you can forgive me, but I know no apology can erase what I have done." Chloe pressed send, tears streaming down her face as she finally felt the bitter weight of arrogance, prejudice, and the price of silence. Not just for herself, but for an entire organization now plummeting into the crisis they had caused with their own hands. In those chaotic hours, As everyone tried to patch up a system rotted from within, the truth kept flooding in, stripping away every mask. And through those late confessions, the villains were no longer absolute evils, but people lost in fear, trapped by their habits of complicity and paralyzed by their own helplessness. While late confessions, apology emails, and internal reports flooded the airline system, Naomi Carter maintained complete silence. No replies, no comforting words, and no appearances before the press or media. That silence was not weakness or denial, but rather the clearest expression of another kind of power. A quiet, steady authority that surface-level ripples cannot shake. The next morning, Naomi walked into the main boardroom at Coleman Travel, her face composed, eyes betraying no personal emotion. The executive team, partner directors, and heads of strategy were already seated. Everyone knew that what was happening was not merely an airline crisis, but an event destined to reshape the entire market. Naomi did not speak of her anger, nor did she recount the humiliation she endured at the airport or the pain of being abandoned by the crowd. Instead, she read a succinct statement in a calm, resolute voice that brooked no compromise with injustice. Effective today, Coleman Travel's entire partner ecosystem will undergo a review under our new ethical standards. Any contract, regardless of its size or the longevity of the partnership, found to violate principles of transparency, equality, or human dignity will be terminated immediately without negotiation. There is no longer room for complicity or for belated apologies. We need real change, and only decisive action will yield meaningful results. No press release was issued. No interviews circulated on social media. Everything happened quietly, yet with fierce determination. Departments methodically audited every cooperation clause, every alliance process, and every representative on the ground. Within a single night, countless contracts were frozen or canceled altogether. Airlines, hotel chains, and service providers that once felt free to disregard anyone now scrambled to conduct their own internal reviews, fearful of being cut out of the multi-billion-dollar network that Coleman Travel controlled. At global partner conferences, Naomi Carter's name began to be spoken with newfound respect, not as a CEO merely skilled at negotiation, but as a symbol of a profound wave of change. She had stood up to expose a rotten system and was prepared to sever ties with any party, even long-standing allies, if they failed to uphold the core values of dignity and fairness. What's most striking is that throughout this process, Naomi never cast herself as a victim. She never rehashed her exclusion at Gate 24, nor did she seek pity or sympathy. For Naomi, the only fitting response to injustice was to build a new ecosystem where those who had been complicit would have no place, forcing every partner to choose, either rise to higher standards or be left behind forever. Beneath the veneer of her silent success, Naomi's power spread forcefully. No need for excuses, no need to shout, because each decision she made was a cold, unequivocal declaration, sowing awareness throughout a system that once believed itself invincible. Following her bold decision at Coleman Travel's headquarters, Naomi ensured that the aftermath of the purge wouldn't end simply with broken contracts or severed ties. She understood that to create lasting change, it wasn't enough to threaten or exclude temporarily. She needed to build an entirely new ecosystem, one where justice, dignity, and accountability weren't merely slogans on the wall, but were reflected in every concrete action. Therefore, just a week later, Naomi convened a closed-door conference in a secluded area outside Denver, far from media lights or prestige nameplates, attended only by colleagues, partners, and business leaders who had demonstrated a genuine commitment to equality and human values. It was an open, welcoming space set amid nature, deliberately removed from the usual power-driven cacophony. At the conference, Naomi didn't recount the airport incident as a triumphant victory or spectacular revenge. Instead, she shared that experience as a wake-up call for everyone. We are not patching up the old system. We are building an entirely new one, a place where dignity forms the foundation, and where everyone has the right to speak up and defend what's right, regardless of their role. Initially, the atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew that what had just happened was the result of years of shame, silence, and compromise. But under Naomi's leadership, personal stories began to flow. From the pain of discrimination to the failures of trying to speak out in a complicit system, to the torment of choosing to stand by rather than stand up for justice. Those unvarnished stories, those unhidden wounds, paved the way for broad reform plans to emerge. Naomi encouraged everyone to revisit the fundamental question: what defines a truly humane ecosystem? How can we ensure that anyone, from the smallest customer to the largest shareholder, can trust that their voice will be heard and respected? Guided by Naomi and her collaborators, a new reform blueprint gradually took shape. There was no room for ambiguous clauses or nebulous rules that small-minded individuals could manipulate. Every process, from recruitment, training, and grievance procedures to partner affiliations, would include transparent controls and clear accountability for each action and decision made by individuals and organizations. Standards of equality, transparency, and respect for diversity were codified into legally binding commitments throughout the new ecosystem. Most importantly, Naomi proposed creating a two-way feedback system in which everyone, at every level, would have both the right and the responsibility to speak up when they encountered injustice or complicity, without fear of retaliation or exclusion. The conference grew more energized by frank discussions and immediate on-the-spot commitments. Working groups formed at once, launching the first pilot projects. From the outside, this might have looked like a secret gathering of a few dozen people. But in reality, this was where, under Naomi's leadership, a new ecosystem was being born. A system whose existence would not rely on brand or traditional power, but instead on human values and collective responsibility. That late afternoon in Denver, in the hush between handshakes and determined glances, everyone understood that the storm Naomi had set in motion was about far more than personal revenge. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, a new standard, a collective resolve where no one would ever have to fear injustice or quietly bow out as they did in the old days. When the Denver conference concluded, there were no fireworks, no media blitz, not a single headline outside of industry circles. Yet in that quiet, a wave of change began to spread. Not only within the network of companies Naomi Carter leads, but among every person who was there. Every person who remained silent. Every person who turned away on that morning at Gate 24. Naomi did not choose to enact revenge by slander or by driving anyone to ruin, nor did she don the mantle of a tragic victim seeking sympathy. Instead, she continued running Coleman Travel as a true leader, steadfast in the new standards she had set, refusing to tolerate any partner, colleague, or employee who failed to honor human dignity even once. Chloe Miller, Lucas Walker, Grace Turner, each of those who had directly or indirectly contributed to that small tragedy on the morning of the airport, faced different paths going forward. Some stayed and dared to change, others had to leave when they no longer fit the new standards. But above all, each of them was forced to confront a central question about their own character and conscience, something that had once been so easily obscured by collective silence. In the days that followed, Naomi received numerous apology letters, notes of thanks, and even heartfelt messages from young employees, international partners, and those who had been indifferent bystanders that day. She did not respond to each message personally, but through her actions she made it clear to everyone. True power does not lie in loud protest, but in the decision to walk away from a toxic system, without casting blame, without excuses, simply by stepping out and rebuilding on a foundation of justice, dignity, and empathy. Once the new policies took effect, many large partners, those who once prided themselves on being irreplaceable, found they had to change if they didn't want to be cut from the new power flow. Conversely, smaller organizations that had previously been marginalized now rose to prominence by placing people and transparency at the center. That domino effect didn't stop at the airline industry. It spread to hotels, transportation, and even to multinational corporations in other sectors. Naomi herself maintained a discreet, calm routine. Each early morning in her high-rise office, she quietly reviewed every contract, every plan, every piece of internal feedback, like a patient conductor guiding a grand symphony, needing no fanfare, no applause. And from the heart of this story, one truth began to resonate. All it takes is one person willing to refuse victimhood in silence, and an entire old order will shake. All it takes is one person who places justice and self-respect above every compromise, and a whole generation will learn to speak up for what is right. The greatest legacy Naomi left behind was not multi-million-dollar contracts or grand conferences, but a spirit, the strength of courageous silence, of steadfast action, enough to redraw the boundaries of justice and dignity in every sphere of modern life. That was the power that made those who once turned away, forced to examine their own consciences, dared to speak out, dared to make amends. It was also a reminder to every organization, every community, never underestimate the strength of a single woman who chooses silence as the seed of a storm that can transform an entire world. The story ends here, but the question for each of us remains. If it were you, would you choose to speak out or stay silent in the face of injustice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe so we can spread the values of justice and dignity throughout society. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next inspiring story. See you in the upcoming videos.